It's the day of New Year's Eve, the end of 2018, and like any good reviewer, I'm going to deliver my top 10 light novel series of 2018. Hello everybody, and welcome to my annual countdown of the top 10 light novels that I read in 2018. Well, light novel series, that is. What I do to get this list is basically I go back over all the books that I read this year. I read 62 novels this year, from 46 different series. And I look at Goodreads, which I use to keep track of everything that I've read, and I assign a rating of 3, 4, or 5 stars to every book I read. 3 stars is the book was meh, disappointing. 4 stars is the book was decent, it delivered what I wanted. 5 stars is the book blew me away. It surprised me in one way or another. And so to get this list, all I do is I grab all of the series that I gave a 5-star rating to at least one volume that I read this year. And, well, I usually don't have quite enough to fill out 10 because I'm very, very frugal with my 5-star ratings. And then I just kind of pad it out with a couple of books that when I look at them, I go, you know, I would have given that 4.5 stars if that had been an option. And then once I've got those 10 titles, I just kind of put them in an order that makes sense to me based on my ratings, my reviews, my feelings towards them, and so forth. And, well, here we are. So with this list, what I'm going to do is in the description down below, I'm listing all of the series that I'm going to be mentioning here. They will not be in the same order from 10 to 1. Just so there's some reason for you to watch the video. I'll include links to the reviews of those volumes that I read this year. I'll also include links to Amazon or the Book Depository if you want to check any of these titles out. So starting off at number 10, this one came to us from Cross Infinite Worlds. It was actually the first Cross Infinite World title that I read, and it is called Obsessions of an Otome Gamer. Now, this one is, first of all, a beast. It has over 100,000 words. It is double, if not 2.5 times the length of your average light novel. And the fact that it kept me really actively engaged in it for the entirety of that framework, more so than some light novels that are only a third of that length do, I had to give it recognition just even for that. But on top of that, I thought it was a really enjoyable and cool novel. It follows main character Mashiro, who dies and is reincarnated into an Otome game that she was absolutely obsessed with. And the book follows several years of her life, and each chapter is essentially, well, it's like an Otome game, basically. Each chapter represents a major point in her life and a point that has the opportunity to somehow advance her relationship with one of the other characters. What is cool about this is, A, you have a very engaging main character. B, she's a very self-aware main character, even going so far as to question how much of her thoughts and actions are being dictated by the world, whether they're being controlled by the game itself, or whether she is acting of her own free will. Secondly, at about 35% into this book, there is a reveal about the world. There is a reveal, and that creates a whole new level of mystery, and just kept me completely hooked. And it keeps coming back again and again, just in little kind of ways that really kept me engaged and excited about reading this book. Now, I reviewed this back in March, and unfortunately there's been no announcement yet of the next volume. My guess is because these things are so massive, it must take a long time for them to get translated, because Cross Infinite World, I honestly think they could have split this in half or even into 3 parts and easily gotten away with it, but they're actually very focused on trying to develop the best sort of experience for readers, and they determined that because this covered a very specific part of Mashiro's life up until I think when she's about to enter high school, or, like beyond primary school, they decided they wanted to keep that all in just one package. So basically the books would be reading stages of her life, which I applaud them for, because like I said, I economically minded, I think I would have split them. But in any case, still waiting for the next volume, but I will definitely be picking it up, because this one was probably one of my bigger surprises this year, because I really didn't know what it was going to be when I was going into it. And like I said, particularly when I hit that sort of third of the way through and all of a sudden there's this new thing, it really surprised me in a lot of good ways. At number 9 on my list, and this one came from J Novel Club, it is My Next Life as a Villainous. All Routes Lead to Doom. Now, this one about main character Katarina, and funny enough, also is an Otome game-based light novel. Basically, same idea. We have a girl who dies and is reincarnated in a world that is similar to an Otome game that she was playing. But what she realizes, and the hook of this one, is that she actually is the girl who was the villainess, the antagonist for the vast majority of the routes in that game. And that in the game, every single route, whether the antagonist won or the protagonist won, Katarina, the antagonist, always had a bad end. There was always something awful that happened to her. And so she determines that she is going to do everything she can to avoid her bad endings. And hilarity ensues. And it really is. It is a very, very funny book. This one just kept me smiling so much, and it's mainly because Katarina is just she is that entertaining kind of clueless. She is that person who thinks that she is very self-aware and that she is having all these brilliant ideas, and they have incredibly unintended effects on the people around her. And it was just so entertaining, and I am so looking forward to continuing with this series. I found this year actually, I'll say it right now, but I found this year that I really did resonate very highly with books that were fun and kind of made me feel all warm and fuzzy and, made you laugh and that kind of stuff. So this one definitely, I had heard all sorts of good things about it, and it completely delivered for me. At number 8, and this one's from Seven Seas, Didn't I Say to Make My Abilities Average in the Next Life? This is one that sat on my shelf for a really long time, and I'm not even sure why it was. I just didn't get around to reading it. But when I did, I regretted having waited so long. It again is a reincarnation story about a girl who, eventually becomes known as Mile. And basically what happens is that she dies, and when she meets God, she says to God, listen, I was an overachiever in my previous life, and I was really capable, and because of that, a lot of people expected so much of me, it made me uncomfortable. Can I just be average in my next life? And God is like, hey, that's cool, all right, no problem. It's kind of a weird request, but hey, have at it. Only problem is God's idea of what is average in a world is a little bit different than what Mile had in mind. So it basically follows her now becoming an adventurer and living in this world and gaining friendships. And again, this was one of those titles that I just found so entertaining. And it again sort of focuses a bit on a main character who is a little bit dense when it comes to how her actions are perceived by others. Mile was trying so hard to be normal or to appear average that she ends up becoming the complete opposite. And so much of that was entertaining. And it was also entertaining to see how, because of her awareness that she was abnormal, she thought, if I can make other people stronger, better, then I will appear less abnormal. And so, sure enough, even just watching the journeys of the characters around her, how they grow and surprise people, and, well, the end tournament of this particular volume just, I was laughing out loud the whole time. So this one really entertained the heck out of me, and I'm definitely going to be picking up future volumes of this one. At number 7, and this one from Yen On, The Saga of Tanya the Evil. I just read the first volume of this one. I do have the second volume on my shelf, but I have to admit these ones are almost intimidating because of just how dense they are. I mean, it is almost like reading a novel on a war, because that's basically what this is. It follows Tanya, who is a reincarnation of a salaryman from Japan, a fairly, I don't know how to exactly explain him. He's almost sociopathic in some ways, but in any case, he comes into this world as this cute, lolly, blonde-headed girl, but the world is basically becoming embroiled in a massive war, and of course there is magic in this world. And so Tanya, slash salaryman, decides to put her talents to their best use so that she can succeed in this world and survive this whole conflict and everything else. And add into this whole layer of, there is a god figure who is very angry, and has basically decided to make Tanya his test case for punishment. And you've got a really weird kind of novel that combines, like, as if you're reading a document documenting a world war, add in magic and the development of magical weapons and stuff like that, added in a vengeful god, and like, it sounds like a lot of really weird moving parts that don't necessarily work together, but I was very surprised by just how well they did work together and created this very living kind of world that you kind of could believe. And it even went so far as to have footnotes, like fake historical footnotes, in the bottom of the book to kind of build the world a little bit more. And this book, I thought, did a fantastic job of its world building. And it was kind of interesting to have a main character. I mean, we do have these in a few other light novels, but we did have a main character that I was like, I don't even know if I really like her. And in fact, in a lot of ways, I'm thinking I don't, but I'm engaged, you know, I'm interested to see just where this person's ideologies are going to take them. So this one was actually really cool, but definitely a book that even in my review, I was like, this is not going to be for everyone. Because as I said, it really does feel more like you're reading a non-fiction account of warfare. And so, depending on what you like, this one's either going to be completely up your alley or you're going to despise it. I am definitely going to read more of this series, but like I said, I just find it intimidating because, I mean, they're thick and like just text, like dance. So, but I'll be checking out at least volume 2 sometime in 2019. At number 6, and this one came from Vertical, The Dark Maidens. Now, this is a standalone single volume, would I call it a murder mystery? It's kind of like a murder mystery, basically. So essentially what this is it takes place at a private girls' school. And the framework of the book is that the characters are all part of the literature club. And the story is that they have a gathering where they all sort of make a meal together and they each tell a story. Recently, the president of the literature club has died under somewhat suspect circumstances. And so the topic of the stories is around the president's death. And as each girl reads her story, you have to try and sort through it to decide what is fact, what is fiction. And all of these girls have their own sort of motives, you get the sense, for trying to push their particular narrative. Not only were the short stories fun and engaging, but the breaks between the stories where you have sort of the new president, who was the vice president previously, of the literature club, inserting her opinions and ideas and just poking and sowing seeds of doubt and everything else as you go along. I found it really, really engaging. And then it has this crazy twist at the end, which I'll admit I did not see coming at all. And so it ends in a really satisfying way as well, which I think is pretty vital when you're reading a mystery, right? Like, I mean, it's great that you have this sort of cool setup and the mechanic of how the story is being told, but if the end doesn't deliver, it's a complete mess. And this one, it just delivered overall. And I have to say, like, I was excited about reading this one because it was so different from pretty much every other light novel that we have, and I wasn't disappointed even a little bit with this one. At number 5 from Yen On, we have I've Been Killing Slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level. Yes, I did say that I had become very enamored with heartwarming and warm, fuzzy type light novels in 2018, and this one probably was one of the epitome of that particular title. In fact, I said in my review that that was exactly it, that I wasn't going to try and say that this was a stunning light novel or that it did anything that was incredibly original. But instead, it just was such a warm blanket and cozy and comforting, I couldn't help but fall in love with it. This one tells the story of Azusa, who is a immortal witch, but in her previous life, she was a wage slave, basically, in Japan, who worked so hard she died because of overwork. And so in this reincarnation, she asked God if she could just have a nice, relaxed, easygoing life. Well, she kind of gets that, except the problem is that over 300 years of her living, she's killing slimes because they're low-level monsters, and it gives her like some materials and means of living. Well, doing that long enough has now made her the most powerful being in the world. And hilarity ensues. I should make that's like my catchphrase. Hilarity ensues. Anyway, I'm just kind of realizing that. In any case, it ends up being that, of course, her being that strong attracts the attention of a myriad of different characters, and it is very much a found family kind of light novel where you have a family unit all building around this character, and it is just so heartfelt in a lot of ways. I read the second volume. It didn't quite give me as much of the warm fuzzies as volume 1, hence why it's not, closer to the top of the list, but man, volume 1 I just absolutely was in love with, and even if I wasn't as in love with volume 2, it was still probably one of my more enjoyable reads of the year. I just, this was just one of those series that, as I said, I can't justify that it's amazing because of how it's written or even the material in it, but it was just the overall feeling of it, it just made me feel great, and that's why I rated it so high. At number 4 from Vertical, we have the Monogatari series. This one in 2018 started the second season of the Monogatari series. This series following Araragi, who is a young man who comes into contact with a vampire, and ever since that point, well, he just keeps running into girls that are encountering what they call aberrations. We would refer to them probably as monsters, spirits, benevolent gods in some cases. Overall, this series is really known for its unique characters, and in particular, its conversations and dialogue and wordplay. It's definitely become a hallmark of Nishio Ishin's style in that regard. In the 2018, with the introduction of Season 2, we actually get new narrators. For the bulk of Season 1, the books are narrated in the first person by Araragi. But when we get into Season 2, we start having other first-person narrators. We have Senjo Gahara, we have Kanberu, there's others, but in particular, I think Kanberu was the one that really kind of made me go, wow, because we had this character that had been portrayed a very specific way while Araragi was narrating the books. And when we finally get to a book where we have her voice, you realize that she is a very different person and a far more complex character than what you probably would have given her credit for throughout the rest of the series. And I really loved this part of the Monogatari series that way, to be able to get into the heads of characters that we have spent a lot of time with, but only having seen them from a particularly biased point of view. Seeing how they see themselves and seeing how they see Araragi and how they see the experiences that they are having with these aberrations. It just made the series completely different for me and just really heightened my enjoyment. And it really felt at this point where Nishio Ishin was just absolutely embracing this series and using it as a means of just exploring whatever he wanted to explore, whether it be time travel or even characters that we thought were sweet becoming, well, kind of evil in a lot of ways. It just went to so many different places that I really found myself enjoying the series so much more this year than I had previously. So that's where this one places on the list this year. At number 3, from Yen on, we have WorldEnd. What do you do at the end of the world? Are you busy? Will you save us? This is a story set in a world that is hundreds of years past the destruction of humanity, where the remaining races now live on elevated islands because the main surface is overrun with these massive beasts that basically have, well, made it impossible for anyone else to live on the surface. And it follows the story of the last remaining human. How he survives this time, I don't want to spoil, so I'll leave that for you to check out. But it has him put in charge of these girls who turn out to be weapons that are being used to try and retake the surface, or at the very least, protect the floating islands from any incursions from the beasts from the surface. It is not an action series. In fact, this is where I felt that it was actually really amazing, was that it was much more about the people who are left behind, the people who care for the soldiers, the people who are emotionally invested in seeing the soldiers come back home from battle. And we had this main character who is so broken in so many ways and trying to kind of put himself back together and find a reason to live. And we have these other characters who see themselves in a very disposable way and see themselves as, this is just the purpose that we have. And them sort of, him trying to instill in them this sense of living and purpose and individuality. And I just, there was so much that really just emotionally resonated with me in this book. And like I said, it would be so easy for this to be a very typical light novel where it was filled with all sorts of action and battles and everything else. And yet it didn't do that. It fought against that. It actively said, no, that isn't the story that's being told here, even though that story is going on somewhere else. And for that, I thought it was very bold, and it just felt very different from so many other light novels that I read this year. And I really felt that it just had really strong writing. I felt that the language being used was really evocative, and that it just was permeated with this sense of melancholy, but at the same time that it felt sad and hopeless, there was also that sense of hope and possibility. I just really thought that this was an amazing book that had so many different emotions in it. And I know it's probably going to make me ugly cry at some point, but I am definitely going to be continuing the series. At number 2 from Yen On, we have Overlord. This, probably not a big surprise to any of you that it's high up on my list. I often talk about how much I enjoy the Overlord series. The series about Ainz Olgaun, who basically was a man who was playing a VR MMO and played it for many, many years. And when they announced they're going to shut the game down, he decides he's going to stay logged on until the system boots him out when it's shut down. But instead of that happening, he instead finds himself now as the character that he has played, which is an undead lich, and that the monsters that were NPCs that inhabited the tomb that he owns as his base of operations are now actually living, thinking, breathing creatures. And they find themselves in a world that is similar to the game that he once played, but different enough that he decides to take a very cautious approach to finding out what the world is like. And the series has been increasingly building to this point where Ainz moves from operating slowly and cautiously behind the scenes to him making some much bigger moves. And we saw some of that happen in the volumes that I read this year, which was volumes 6 and 7. Now, volume 6 actually was the end of a 2-part story that was all about sort of it was kind of like a siege on the city that was being orchestrated by Ainz and by his denizens of Nazarick. But it was a very interesting book in that it focused at the same time that all this sort of stuff was going on. It also focused very heavily on the individuals of Nazarick and individual relationships and how these denizens of Nazarick may interact with others in the world. And there's just so many layers going on in this series that I just can't help but be engaged and love every aspect of it. Volume 7, and I mean, probably the one reason that this book isn't, the series isn't number 1 or was competing pretty heavily for number 1 and didn't quite make it, is because Volume 7, as much as I did enjoy it, and I absolutely did, it was pretty much like a dungeon dive / slaughter. It was a really fun book to read, but I didn't think that it had quite the same complexity of story and relationships that we had had in the previous volume. So overall, I mean, it was still a really excellent book, and man, left on a cliffhanger that isn't getting resolved until volume 9 comes out in January. So yeah, I've been waiting eagerly for that one, but overall, Overlord continues to impress me, continues to do very well. I believe, if I recall, it was number 1 on my list last year. So yes, continues to be a series that I very much enjoy. Finally, at number 1, my top light novel series of 2018, Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? This one brought to us by Yen On. I read volumes 10 and 11 this year, and if you're familiar with Danmachi at all, you probably know why this is number 1, given that I read those 2 particular books. They are part of a ongoing arc. In fact, volume 11 ends the arc, and just incredible books. The way that they advance the character, the way that they force the character into moral decisions that a lot of light novel characters never seem to have to make. I mean, Bell was forced to make decisions that would either speak to his morals but meant coming into conflict with a lot of people that he respected and in some cases even loved, or taking an easier path but being at conflict with his own beliefs. And you have to really, I found that I really loved the character and continue to love the character because of him deciding to take the harder road. And volume 11, as it sort of brings everything to a close, does this really cool kind of shout back all the way back to sort of the early books of the series and brings sort of the series very much full circle in terms of how it feels, and really puts a big cap on the series. It feels up to volume 11, where you almost feel like, okay, this is, as much as there have been arcs within these 11 volumes, this whole 11 volumes feels now like a complete piece, and that we're going to start somewhere new in volume 12. I also appreciated the fact that, you know, even the wins that Belle had in these two books weren't really wins. They were just kind of like, we avoided the worst case scenario kind of situations. The fact that he lost something, the fact that he gained something, like, to me, these two volumes were just so well written. I mean, I think Danmachi in general is one of the better written light novel series that we have, even, and I mean just stylistically in terms of the writing and the word choices and everything else. But in terms of the characters, in terms of the challenges that Belle faces, I just find it really, really entertaining overall. But these two volumes in particular, I just thought were, you know, just such a great emotional journey. They were gut-wrenching. They were parts that made you want to cheer. There were parts that made you want to, you know, be angry and throw the book and everything else. And it just was such a huge emotional ride over these books. And, you know, even though, like, definitely you could say that there are aspects about Danmachi that, you know, it has in common with a lot of sort of OP main character type situations. The thing that I continue to love about this series is that we have a main character who is earning his OP status. Even the thing that makes him kind of even his sort of, you know, cheat, if you want, that makes him advance faster, is still based on his desire and effort. And so it's not like we have a character who, yeah, I cast one spell and wiped out 1 million people and it made me super OP, or I just am OP right from the start, or whatever the case. We have a character who is earning that level, that you can see the struggles that he is going through, and that the book continues to put him into morally questionable areas that challenge his beliefs and his perceptions of the world and of people. And you don't, like I said, you don't see that in a lot of light novels. You know, a lot of light novels, generally speaking, it's just like, you know, when, particularly ones that have OP main characters, a lot of them are just like, how are you going to beat this guy this week? And, you know, what, you know, okay, yeah, you came into conflict with someone who seems stronger than you, but, well, we all know you're going to overcome it in the end. It doesn't feel that way in this book to me. And I mean, again, these are all my opinions, of course, but I have really loved the journey of this character, and I do love the world building that goes on, and how the book doesn't try to sanitize Aurario, that it has these seedier, darker elements, that adventurers aren't all just, you know, fantastic, noble people. Even characters that recur throughout the book aren't necessarily infallible. I just find that it's a series that I always enjoy, and that I always find something gratifying in the reading of. And like I said, for this year, volumes 10 and 11 just, I thought, were real hallmarks of this series, and really just took it to some amazing emotional levels. And so it finds its way to top of my list on 2018. So those are my picks for the top light novels of 2018. What about you guys? I'm sure that some of you agree or disagree with some of my picks. I'd love to know, what did you read this year, and what was your top 10, or even your top 5 if you don't want to list 10. You know, heck, what was your favorite light novel of 2018? Even if you just want to put that in there, I'd love to see what you guys read this year and what you enjoyed most. So thanks so much for joining me in this video and the past year. It's been a fantastic 2018. The Light Novel Podcast launched. I was on panels at conventions. There was a lot of really amazing things that went on in 2018. I'm hoping 2019 is going to be even bigger and better. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I can make some of the things that I have up here work out here. So again, thank you so much for joining me in this video. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.